PT had an exceptionally good memory from a very young age. Even now, he can vaguely remember things that happened at home when he was only 1 or 2 years old, for example, lying in his cradle and watching his mother give an injection to his father, who suffered from asthma, or being chased by a flock of geese when he was just learning to walk. At times, strange images would appear in his mind, scenes of a courtesan working in a brothel, as well as scenes of people suffering various tortures in hell. He told his parents about these things, but they assumed he was simply saying random things as children do, so they paid little attention. When PT was 6 years old, the images that had appeared in his mind began to connect with one another. At first, they were fragmented and impossible to piece together. Later, however, they became increasingly detailed, until eventually they formed an extraordinarily clear sequence of events. As he grew older, PT wrote down his tragic memories of several lifetimes, turning them into a story that deeply moved many people. In my previous life, I was a courtesan in a brothel. I often wore function costumes and enjoyed listening to Gezai opera, a form of opera from Taiwan and Fujian, although I do not know exactly what year it was. When I was young, because my family was poor, I had no choice but to work as a cook for a wealthy household. Because I was attractive, I was later assaulted by my old and ugly employer. Eventually, circumstances drove me into a brothel, where I made a living selling smiles and entertaining men. The owner and his wife, as well as the maidservants in the household, were all very kind to me. I was very young at the time. I used my beauty to deceive many people, while I was also deceived by many others. Eventually, a heartless man won my heart. I believed his sweet words, but in the end he deceived me until I had nothing left. I gave him my body and soul, and even all the money I had saved was taken from me. Unable to bear the pain any longer, resentment arose in my heart, and I wanted revenge. Eventually, overwhelmed by grief and unable to accept what had happened, I hanged myself in my own room. After my physical body died, my soul arrived at a vast, gloomy road. Men and women, old and young, were everywhere. Their faces were solemn and gloomy, yet each person walked along a path that seemed to have been predetermined for them. Perhaps this was the road to the underworld. I felt as though an invisible force was pushing everyone forward. After walking for some time, we reached a crossroads and separated into different directions. I and a group of other people were led to the foot of a cliff where there was a narrow bridge. This was the Naya Bridge. The place was dark and cold. Cries and screams could be heard everywhere, while waves of foul wind and the stench of blood filled the air. Many people fell from the slippery, pitch-black surface of the bridge. I did not want to go, but I could not control myself and stepped onto it anyway. I had not gone very far when I fell. It was an enormous pit with no visible boundaries or edges. It was filled with all kinds of large and small snakes of various colors, many of them covered with sharp spines. There were so many snakes that they could not be counted, and they constantly rushed toward me and attacked me. Then I realized that there were many other people inside the pit. Yet I could not see their heads because, just like me, each person was quickly surrounded and swallowed up by the mass of snakes. The snakes continually slithered through my body as easily as loaches swimming through tofu. Blood flowed without stopping. My body felt as though it had been blown apart by a bomb, scattering into countless pieces. The pain was unbearable. After a while, my flesh would regenerate, only for the same boundless suffering to begin again and again. That was when I realized that this place was hell. All I wanted was to escape from that valley as quickly as possible. I vaguely heard many people crying out in pain, their voices extremely weak. After what seemed like an eternity, I finally managed to leave. But even after escaping the valley and reaching the cliff, the tortures of hell were still far from over. After leaving the valley, I suddenly saw the figure of a divine being. He was much taller than an ordinary person and wore a grey Taoist robe. His appearance was extraordinarily solemn and dignified, unlike any statue of a deity I had ever seen in the human world. He may have been Ksitagava Bodhisattva. He did not speak or use ordinary language. Instead, through spiritual communication, he let me know that because I had not believed in the Buddha, had not respected my parents, had lied and deceived others, had worked in a brothel selling smiles, and had used my beauty to deceive a certain man and ultimately cause his death, I had committed many kinds of evil karma and therefore had come to this place to suffer. He also told me that after my punishment was completed, I absolutely had to devote myself to spiritual cultivation. At that moment, however, I still felt no shame or remorse whatsoever. I continued to believe that I had done nothing wrong. Other people had deceived me too. They had driven me to desperation, causing me to hang myself and then suffer the torment of being torn apart by snakes. My heart remained filled with resentment. The divine being gradually disappeared. After he left, I was chased up a high mountain by a ghostly official whose yellowish skin made him look as though he was suffering from tuberculosis. The path was rough, uneven, and extremely difficult to walk on. Whenever I fell, countless sharp instruments, such as drills, knives, and awls, would suddenly emerge from the ground. They came in all shapes and sizes. The moment I fell, these sharp instruments would shoot upward like a bed of spikes, piercing through my entire body. My flesh would be torn apart and blood would pour everywhere. The pain was so intense that I would lose consciousness. Yet as soon as I fainted, my flesh would become whole again, and I would once more be subjected to the same torment and pain. It continued without end. After crossing the high mountain, I was pushed into an enormous stone mill that kept turning endlessly. I was terrified of being crushed, but I could not find even the slightest gap in which to hide. I had no choice but to endure being inside the mill as every inch of my flesh was crushed to pieces, only to regenerate again. I could hear the continuous cries of demons. The sound was so terrifying that it made me tremble with fear even without being touched. Not long afterward, I was tied to a burning bronze pillar. The smell of burning flesh spread everywhere. My flesh was charred and mangled, and my consciousness became hazy, until every inch of my flesh had been destroyed. After that, I was tied to another enormous bronze pillar. A ghostly official used a sharp hook to pull out my tongue, continuing until the root of my tongue was torn apart. Next, I was thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil. My body was burned so severely that I writhed uncontrollably, swelling and blistering like lard being fried. I felt as though my body had been blown apart by a bomb into countless pieces. The extreme agony continued to repeat itself over and over again. Even when I begged for death, I could not die. After being released from the cauldron of boiling oil, I and a group of other people were forced to make small clay balls, as though performing hard labor. Some people could not shape the clay because it was too dry. Some balls were large, some small, and their shapes and quantities were inconsistent. Once completed, they were placed into each person's gourd-shaped container. Because none of us had been given anything to eat or drink, everyone was exhausted and starving. We eventually came to a place that resembled a disaster relief station. After handing over our gourd-shaped containers, we were given a bowl of thick white soup that smelled foul and fishy. At that moment, I sensed that something was strange about it, so I did not drink the soup. This was the Meng Po soup, which people are said to drink before reincarnation in order to forget their previous lives. After experiencing various tortures in hell, PT's karmic debts from his previous life had been reduced considerably. He was then sent toward reincarnation. The following is what happened immediately before he was reincarnated. I was brought before a certain official in charge of judgment. He had large eyes and thick eyebrows, and his appearance was imposing even without displaying anger. He also communicated with me through spiritual means, telling me that I was about to descend into the human world and be reincarnated as a woman. He instructed me never to deceive people again and to do more good deeds and accumulate more merit. After hearing this, I poured out all my grievances and complaints, recounting the suffering and injustices I had experienced in my previous life. I even explained why I did not want to be reborn as a woman and instead wanted to become a man so that I could more easily take revenge. The official was extremely surprised that I could still remember these things. Nevertheless, he told me to line up. He then gave each person a colored identification token bearing a number. I received a red token. After receiving their tokens, everyone went to line up in front of a door of the corresponding color, waiting to be reincarnated. At that moment, I heard the officials nearby discussing the meaning of the colors. Red represented females, light blue represented males, green represented ducks, purple represented, and so on, with each color corresponding to different kinds of creatures and animals. Because I did not want to be reborn as a woman, I took advantage of the moment when the person in the neighboring line was not paying attention. I snatched his light blue token and threw my red token to him. The ghostly official chased after me, but I ran as fast as I could toward the blue door and jumped through it. I arrived at a place with many houses. It was late at night. Some houses had lights outside their doors, while others were dark. Holding a token with a coded number on it, I found the corresponding door number, entered the house, and was reincarnated as a man in this lifetime. In this lifetime, when I was attending a specialized school, The first girlfriend I ever dated was actually the heartless man from my previous life, the man who had deceived me and driven me to hang myself. When we first met, we both felt an extraordinary sense of familiarity, as though we had known each other for a very long time. Gradually, images from our previous lives became increasingly clear before my eyes. Eventually, because our parents opposed the relationship, and because I myself did not want to continue the karmic relationship from our previous life, we broke up. The husband and wife who had owned the brothel in my previous life had now become my parents. The man whom I had deceived and caused to die in my previous life had now become my wife. When we first met, she felt strangely familiar to me, yet we were still incompatible because I had never truly loved her in our previous life. Even in this life, I often found myself criticizing her for no apparent reason. She, too, always carried resentment toward me and kept her distance from my family. The two of us often used the silent treatment to torment one another. Although I earned a great deal of money for her, she was never satisfied. Of course she would not be satisfied, nor would she feel grateful. In my previous life, I had deceived her of her wealth and caused her death. Therefore, in this life, I had to repay that debt, and repay it twice over. How could she possibly be satisfied? Because I had hanged myself in my previous life, PT was afraid to wear clothes with collars in this lifetime. He was terrified that the suffocating sensation around his neck would happen again. And because he had once worked as a cook in his previous life, although he had been reincarnated as a man this time, his cooking skills were no less impressive than those of professional female chefs. Because he had once suffered the torment of being thrown into a cauldron of boiling oil, PT was extremely afraid of heat in this lifetime, while cold did not bother him. Whenever he saw a stone mill turning, he would feel frightened, and goosebumps would cover his entire body. This was connected to his experiences in hell during his previous life. Because he had not drunk the Mengpo soup that was supposed to erase memories of his previous life, the memory of PT hanging himself in his previous life and subsequently descending into hell to suffer punishment remained vivid, as though it had happened only yesterday. This made him understand that even relatives who may seem distant in this lifetime are connected to us through karmic relationships. Experiences like these, and stories from history like these, are things that each of us has heard and seen many times. In truth, it does not matter whether we hear or see them many times or only a few times. What truly matters is whether we can look within ourselves through these stories, remind ourselves of what is right, and change ourselves. Hell is truly terrifying, but as long as we maintain wholesome thoughts and our conscience, and wholeheartedly persevere in spiritual cultivation, we can distance ourselves from it.